All right, so I got into a conversation with somebody on the internet. It was over a video game console, and I want to tell you about this guy Slow Mo. So he was talking to me about how we can't have a constructive dialogue or open dialogue where we're not at each other's throats or at odds with each other. That we can't, between the left and the right. And SJWs got brought up, or wokeism, the PC culture people, that kind of stuff. So he was saying we can't have an open constructive dialogue. And I'm thinking, like, well, we can. We don't have to follow the rules of these people that don't engage in opening a dialogue. There's this whole community of, like, I want to debate you, and it flies in the face of decency of anything that I've ever known to be philosophy and actual logic and critical thinking, and the art of debate. It's all about WWE SmackDown, who can own who, and no, we actually can have an open dialogue. We can, if we choose to. I personally think social media has a big influence into why this is really, really difficult, because a lot of people watch these talking heads all over social media, and people are kind of spoon-fed opinions and talking points. And when the talking points venture outside this very, very narrow degree of talking points, people sort of flip shit. It just depends. It's on both sides. You have your leftist social media talking heads, you have your right wing social media talking heads, and they're like, here's your spoon fed opinions, here's what you should say. And so, what I like to talk about, the things that I keep bringing up, are things like tent cities, crony capitalism, abuse of power by a major corporation. And I've had a lot of very constructive conversations with right leaning individuals. I think that they can be had. So I'm thinking, I can have a conversation with this person. Sure, absolutely. I'm not going to shriek in horror or yell out a bunch of talking points from the left that are unrelated to the topic that we're talking about because I want to be right, or just blurt out some kind of pejorative or some kind of name calling, some kind of ad hominem attack, WWE SmackDown style. I'm not going to do that. I usually ask questions, try to figure out where the person stands, because I need to know where they stand, how they think that their ideas are going to work, and such like that. And then we can discuss. We have to define these things first. If you don't have the definition, then you don't know what you're debating. So this person, I asked him a very simple question. And the question was pertaining to that I predominantly focused on Tyson, Pilgrim's Pride, and Amazon have been known to do this, but there are other warehouse factory places that do this as well, where people are wearing adult diapers, depends, to work. And if they don't do that, they might, in the middle of production, poop or pee in a waste bin, on the floor, in a box, in a bottle, and if they're, or in their pants. So they're working in their own excrement. And quite simplistically, the question is, because personally, from my perspective, I think that this is unacceptable. This is not what I see as being a part of a Western nation, a free world, a um, it's not American. It's not what I would call American. It's not something I would expect to see in America or in a Western civilization in general. It's something I would expect to see in China. And we don't want to become China, right? I think we'd all agree on that. We don't want to become China. So the question was like, so he, from what I could tell, at least, everything was very ambiguous and vague for some reason. But from what I could tell, it's like we don't want regulations, which is what I hear a lot. We don't want to spruce up our social safety net, the mixed economy that we have here in the United States of capitalism and socialism. We don't want to do that. We don't want to spruce up the socialism. We don't want to do that. That's big government. Icky. That's icky. And then something about anti-unions was thrown out, and so it's like, okay, so we don't want regulation. We don't want unions. We don't want socialism, mixed economy socialism. We don't want that. So the simple question is so there are people working in their own excrement here in the United States at certain companies, predominantly warehouse work. In America, in a Western civilization, in a free nation, is that acceptable? Do we think that's okay now? That's a yes or no question. Now, based on the answer, if the answer is yes, then naturally I'm going to want to know, okay, why? Why is that acceptable? If the answer is no, then I want to know what this person thinks the solution is. Because they've shot down all my solutions. They're like, no, all your solutions suck. Okay, well, that's my opinion. That's what I think the solution is. So what do you think the solution is? A lot of the times the argument that I hear in response to the solution that a lot of people have given me is cut taxes, further deregulation, sort of the trickle-down economy, Reaganomics type argument. And I would say I don't think that works. We keep doing that, and it keeps consolidating power into the hands of very large corporations. And they seem, if you say you can do whatever you want, oh boy, they do it. They certainly do. So I've tried to point out too that by deregulation, they start engaging in things that are part of crony capitalism, like lobbying, or that the government is providing socialism for the top class. So they're handing people like Philip Morris, companies like Philip Morris, $500 million. And they're not applying this. They look at an individual that's applying for SSDI, for example, that would only get $1,300. That's max benefits, $1,300 a month on SSDI. SSI is only $700. Thanks to Biden, that's improved a little bit. I know SSI now pays $780 instead of $700, which is probably going to be different in New York and California because the cost of living there is insane. So I don't think the tax cuts and the deregulation work. I think when you deregulate, it perpetuates the lobbying and the crony capitalism and sort of this classist socialism, where Philip Morris gets $500 million because people are vaping. And I can get down with free market, but that's not free market when you do that. When you give Philip Morris, who's not even sinking because people are vaping, he's just not making as much money as his cigarette sale. I keep saying his. Philip Morris isn't alive anymore. The company's sales in cigarettes have gone down just a little bit. Just a little bit. They're not going to go bankrupt. But when you do that, that's not free market capitalism. It's not. That's a protected class. That's something that could be defined as economic fascism. When I say economic fascism, I'm not talking about Nazism. I'm talking about the merger of state and corporate power. And there's actually an article that I read that, and I'll go over that in a different video. But so what I find interesting about this is, so I asked a pretty simple question, I think. People are working in their own excrement because their employers are not allowing them to take bathroom breaks. So they're working in their own feces, whether it's on the floor, whether it's in a waste bin, whether they're doing it in a bottle while they're shaving your chicken that's going to go into a prepackaged thing that you're probably going to buy at Walmart. It doesn't have to be Walmart. They sell Tyson chicken everywhere. So just know that the person who was working on that drumstick that you're going to cook tonight could have been pooping on the floor while they were doing it, or in their pants, or in a waste bin, or in a box. And they're doing that at Pilgrim's Pride as well. And everybody knows they're doing this at Amazon, which he proclaimed is not happening. I don't know where he gets that. It's like, I talk to people who are on the right that know this is happening as well and think that Amazon is like fucked up. So I don't understand. So I'm just asking a simple question. I'm tired of reiterating that. So what is his response? I'm pro-gun. Okay. I'm not against gun rights. I talk to C.R. Williams quite frequently. He's somebody that I would consider a friend. I've actually tried to give what I think would be good ideas to try and help the argument to keep guns and stop regulating them. I'm not trying to take away your guns, but what does that have to do with the question I asked about people? Like, do you think it's acceptable? Is that okay in a Western civilization? Is that what we're doing now? We are allowing people to work in their own excrement. What does being pro-gun have to do with that? Oh, he goes on. He doesn't even give me a chance to chime in. I just kind of sit there quietly while he spits all this stuff out. Apparently, he's also pissed that Pam is 40 years old and she's still working behind the counter at KFC. I don't know what to say about that. I don't know that that's a systemic problem. I don't know. Like, that sounds like a personal problem. That sounds like something that a stuck-up snob would say. Maybe Pam is still working behind the counter at KFC at 40 years old, because a lot of the times we do jobs not because it's what we want to do or what we went to college for, but we're doing them because we need to survive. So it's not about what you want to do. It's about what you have to do, what you need to do, what you got to do to survive. A lot of people are in that situation. It doesn't mean that they haven't worked hard to get out of that situation. It doesn't mean they want to be in that situation. It doesn't automatically mean they're lazy. I think that's kind of where he was going with that. But what does that have to do? Again, what does that have to do with my question? That didn't answer my question. Then he goes on to start talking about his family, that he's a single income household and supports his wife and children. And it's like, okay. Again, what does that have to do with the question? And then come to my surprise, he said no to the unions, but he's in a union. I'm not even going to dig into that one. I'm not interested in it. I want to know if the answer is yes, it's okay for people to work in their own excrement. Why? And if the answer is no, what do you think the resolve to that is? Now, as far as 40-year-old Pam working behind the counter at KFC, I don't know that there's any government policy you could enact to do something about that. Like, that's probably a combination between there's some systemic issues that probably work against Pam that put her in that position, like the idea that you can go and get a degree in something like you could get a degree as a biotechnician when the job market is saturated and you end up working in management at a hotel or retail or customer service. I mean, stuff like that happens. It's unfortunate. When I was working in management, I met plenty of people that were well overqualified. And some of them had some very interesting degrees, like, why are you working here? One person had a degree as an engineer, and he was working as my employee at a McDonald's. And I also had an employee that was a lung surgeon. I had an employee that was a software developer. They design software programs. A lot of these people that are overqualified, a lot of the times we offer them management positions because they're like, you could totally do it. A lot of the times they say no, they don't want to because they just feel that the job in general, whether they're in management or not, is just beneath them. Understandably so, especially talking to the guy with the engineering degree. It's like, that's got to be a major kick in the nuts. So the guy that was a software developer, he actually did take the position in management. So good for him. The guy who was a lung surgeon, he denied it because he was so close to retirement anyway. He just said, fuck it. So yeah, these things, I mean, there's some systemic things that are working against people that put them in that position. But the fact of the matter is no matter what you do, you're always going to have a lower class. The only thing I'm advocating for is that we define what lower class is that you can't go any lower than a roof over your head, food, water, a toilet. that should be implied, and possibly healthcare. So I would say that would be the defining definition of what rock bottom is that you would still have access to the bare essentials of life. That's what I'm trying to do. I don't know that you can completely, you're ever going to fix, like the fact of the matter is like you could get a really nice degree in psychology, which when I worked at a warehouse, I worked with several people with degrees in that sort of field. There was a sociologist and a psychologist. There was some other person I worked with that had a really nice degree too that still worked there, because that's just, life doesn't work out how you want it to all the time. That happens. You're not going to get rid of, like, even if you gave everyone a pristine college education in the United States, you're still going to have a lower class and people working way beneath their qualifications. That you're never going to have a society where that's not the case. That's impossible. And communism, the failures of communism, I think, prove that. You can increase the job demand for some of these things, but eventually the job market just becomes so saturated. It's like there's nothing you can do. That's the way it goes. So I don't think there's anything politically you can do about Pam being 40 years old and still working behind the counter at KFC. I don't think there's anything you can do. And there's probably also some life choices that probably played a part in that as well. But to me, that sounds like a personal issue. That sounds like, from my personal opinion, this is just my personal opinion, that sounds like somebody who's just kind of a stuck-up snob that looks down on people and says that they're beneath him because they're in that position. And it's like, for all you know, they could have a degree that towers over yours. So I think that's incredibly judgmental. You have no idea what that person's story is. You just don't know. And if he does know who they are on a personal level, again, this is a personal problem. This is not a political one. He rambled some stuff off about SJWs, and I'm still sitting there like, all I did was ask you a question, and it's a yes or no question. Are there follow-up questions to yes and no? Yeah, there are. But this is an example of how you don't have a productive conversation. I could tell almost immediately this guy has been watching a lot of talking heads on social media, and I felt like I was just getting hit with a barrage of unrelated talking points, like he's been pre-programmed, just spew all this nonsense out. Because anyone that's on the left is just dog shit and gross and disgusting, and they're wrong, and we're just better than them. So just spew these things out, and you'll win the argument, and you'll be right. Never mind that when you're actually making an argument, the goal is to sound more rational and more logical than your opponent, because you're at the end of the day, I know I'm not going to convince him, and he's not going to convince me. The idea is that you put forward an argument to convince an audience, and you do that by making the most rational and most logical argument. But saying a bunch of nonsense to me and then storming off like Ben Shapiro did when he was on BBC.
It's an interesting book, but my point is your book claims that society...
Well, it'd be nice if you would quote it from time to time.
Your book is... Well, actually, I've done so several times, and I'm about to do so again, if you would let me just finish the question. Your book claims that society is turning its back on Judeo-Christian values.
Yeah,
what are those values? What are the values it's turning its back on?
I'm not inclined to continue an interview with a person as badly motivated as you as an interviewer, so I think we're done here. I appreciate your time.
All right, well, thank you for your time and for showing that anger is not part of American political discourse. Now, Mr. Shapiro, we'll say goodbye.
No, you're right that we can't have a productive conversation or proactive conversation if that's what you're going to do. And I tried to explain to him, I'm like, look, I have right-leaning friends that I talk to about these issues, and we can talk about them in a civilized manner without yelling and screaming at each other, without getting upset, without going after each other's throats. We can agree to disagree without being mad and frustrated and throwing insults and ad hominems. We can do this. Like, I've done this. Michael Move is an ANCAP. And you know what? Like, he listens to me, even though I'm completely opposite. He wants complete deregulation of capitalism. I want regulation of capitalism. I think we both understand that we're coming from a good place. We both want to improve society and improve the quality of living of the people within it. We're not hateful individuals that are trying to destroy people's lives here. So it's when we do disagree, there's no malice, there's no hatred. We just understand. I think this will work, and hopefully, like, if it's put into practice, hopefully it works out how I think it will. And same with Michael Move. I don't think that ANCAP will work, but if it's put into practice, I hope it works how he thinks it will. Because for both of us, if it works how we think it will, then it should be fine. And I talked to C.R. Williams, libertarian. We have conversations about this all the time. I've even talked to him about the possibility that maybe, because the interests of rural areas needs an open market, living in a major city, it almost demands that you have regulation because the major companies are just steamrolling us in the city. It's like out in the rural areas, you need open market because a lot of them are farmers. And if you put regulations on capitalism, it really hurts them. It hurts an independent business. I'm for independent business. I hate the major conglomerate corporations, but here in the city, that's almost all there is. If you want to have an independent, small mom and pop or independently owned company here in the city, then you need regulations on capitalism because these big companies will stop at nothing to crush someone's dream. They don't care. They don't care if you become homeless. They don't care if they destroy your dreams. They don't care if they kill you. They don't care if you become... They don't care what happens to these people that they put out of business. And in fact, in this city, when Starbucks rolled out, they put a coffee house right next door to every single independent, locally owned coffee house in this city. And people were protesting and boycotting these stores that were put right next door to them. And in some instances, we've gotten those Starbucks to be removed. Now, we still have Starbucks here, but the thing is that the whole point of putting it right next door to an independent, locally owned coffee house was to put them out of business. And some of them have been around for years. Like, one example I can think of is there was a locally owned Italian restaurant here in this city, and Boston Market bought it. And it's gone. Goodbye. We also had an independently owned, privately owned company that was regional to this city. It was only here in this city. It was called Nichols Diner. It'd been around since the 1920s, and actually a very prominent beatnik poet used to eat there. So this is a historical restaurant. It's a historical grease spoon. Some big chain restaurant came along, bought up the property, kicked him out, poof, gone. And that's what happens with these big companies here in the city. But I'm getting off track here. I digress. So Joshua, my friend Joshua, the goth Republican. I don't think he describes himself literally as a Republican. I think he's more on a libertarian scale. But again, that's another person that I talk to, and we disagree on a lot of stuff. But guess what? We're still friends. So yeah, we can have a civilized dialogue, but I can't have a civilized dialogue with somebody when I ask them a question because I'm trying to figure out what they think a solution is, or if they think this is appropriate or inappropriate to begin with, before we move on from that. Does he just not understand that I'm trying to understand what his position is? We can't have a civilized conversation when you throw a temper tantrum, fling a bunch of talking points that are completely unrelated at me, and then storm off. That's the problem. He was telling me that we can't have a civilized conversation. I'm trying to have a civilized conversation. What's with all the dog shit? What does you supporting the Second Amendment have anything to do with the question I asked? What does your irritation at 40-year-old Pam still working at KFC have to do with it? What does you being a single income household taking care of 2 children and a wife have anything to do with it? I'd say that you're in a good position, and a lot of the things that I propose would have no effect on you. And then he says that he's not represented in Congress, and that's that's a big issue, real big problem. He's not represented because everybody in Congress is hung up on the culture war and SJW stuff. And I'm like, well, No, not really. Actually, when I watch Democrats and Republicans go on someone like Bill Maher's show, Bill Maher tries to bring up the whole wokeism culture and stuff to them, and they don't really want to talk about it. They want to talk about policy. And one of the policies he brought up, which is a nonpartisan thing, was the infrastructure bill. And it's like, well, yeah, actually, that's what most Democrats and Republicans in Congress are talking about. I even brought up the fact that there was a congressperson, I think back in 2021, there was a bill put on the House that was trying to outlaw lobbying as it pertains to conflict of interest. Well, guess what? That bill was proposed by a Republican from Texas. And you know what? I don't care that it was proposed by a Republican from Texas. The point is that it doesn't matter if it's done by a Republican or a Democrat. The thing that matters is that it's happening, is that somebody, someone at least, is addressing this issue. That's the important part. And I would agree, and I think most of my right-leaning friends agree, that lobbying should be illegal. And most leftists I know of think that it should be illegal too. So why does it matter that it was a Republican? It doesn't. What does he mean he's not represented? Most of the Congress people are not talking about SJW issues. They're not doing that. You do have some Republicans though, like what is her name? Marjorie Taylor Greene, that was showing internet memes as a form of argument. I think that was pretty bizarre. And you know, she supports QAnon and stuff like that, but that's one person. So no, I think it's hard to have a productive and civilized or diplomatic conversation when somebody's locked and loaded with all these talking points from a bunch of social media talking heads to just spew out all over the place. Just puke them out of your mouth at high velocity. It's like, that has nothing to do with the subject that I was just talking about. And the fact of the matter is I'd be willing to bet most, in fact, I would say on both the left and the right, most of the talking heads all across social media, whether it be Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, doesn't matter. Most people are not addressing the issue of tent cities. You will get the addressment of the working conditions at warehouses where people have to work in their own excrement, and I think it's pretty nonpartisan. I think most people think that's fucked up. The thing that we disagree on is what to do about it. I fail to see how cutting taxes and deregulation is going to fix that. So I want to thank the people out there, that the right-leaning people I have had conversations with, where it is a diplomatic, it is a conversation that is civil, and you know, we can even still walk away smiling and laughing. You know, I appreciate you guys. I'm glad that we can do that. I'm, you know, like we're supposed to work in sort of a unison aspect. The left is a collectivist perspective and the right is an individualist perspective. So we should be able to come together on some things, right? And some things we may not come together on, but some things it's just kind of like not my table. But you can't have a conversation with somebody that's going to be completely irrational and illogical. It's like, well, to slow-mo, you are correct. You and I cannot have a civil conversation, or at least a rational one, because we can't even get to the point of where our stances are. If you would actually have a conversation with me, you'd find saying that you're pro-gun means nothing to me because I'm not trying to take away your gun rights. Wrong type of leftist. And if you were to have a conversation with me, you'd find that out. And if you were to have a conversation with me, I really don't care what you think about 40-year-old Pam working behind KFC. That's not interesting to me. I've known many people in that situation. There's a lot of circumstances that can happen. Maybe she is lazy and that's why she's doing it. That is a scenario. But there's a lot of scenarios. I'm really more interested in why companies are being allowed to behave unethically. Is that acceptable? If it's acceptable, if that's what we're doing in Western civilizations, then people need to stop saying, I don't want to become like China. Well, we're moving in that direction. What are we going to do about it? So if you think it's acceptable, why? And if you don't think it's acceptable, if you don't like sprucing up our socialism, our social safety nets, if you don't like regulating capitalism, and when I say regulation, like don't take it to an extreme level. It could be just something as simple as, no, you cannot have your employees sign a contract saying they can't sue you if a piece of equipment rolls over their leg and breaks it in so many places that they're now in a wheelchair. You can't, I think that should be illegal. You can't make a contract that says you can't sue them over that. I'm not a big fan of non-disclosure agreements either. There are certain instances where I can understand that, like don't leak recipes, but don't tell me I can't sit there and tell people that your warehouse has a problem with birds and that when you eat one of their pastries, you might be eating bird shit. You, as a company, you need to fix that, not try to sweep that under the carpet and blame the employee for trying to warn people for the sake of public health and safety. That's what I mean. And I also had to read the First Amendment to him because the reality is the right to form a union is protected under the First Amendment, which I read to him. And then he said he didn't believe me and that he had to go and read the First Amendment. And I'm like, well, I just read it to you. So, yeah, and we couldn't even get onto the subject of union busting law firms that exist at Amazon, which could be a reason why Amazon employees didn't sign up for the union. Couldn't get into that, or the leaked photos of anti-union propaganda in bathroom stalls at Amazon. Couldn't get into that. Or address why he thinks it's fake media that Amazon's warehouses have done some pretty dirty things to employees, which most people I talk to, regardless of where they stand on the political aisle, seem to know, except for him. So it's like, who are you listening to on social media? Anyway, so that's I just wanted to tell you about this guy named Slow-Mo and why I think certain proponents of social media are poisonous to the Discord, because we can't have a proper conversation if a bunch of assumptions are automatically presumed from the get-go, and we can't even get to the definitions or where we actually stand politically or philosophically. That would be problematic. So I thank all of you for being so open-minded and free-thinking enough to engage in conversation in the comment section or with me in general, whether you agree with me or not. And that's how I think it should be. But again, most of the people that I'm interacting with are not far right leaning individuals that are like fascism, fuck yeah, and a bunch of bigoted nightmares. Most people are not that way. So we've all, if you want to see my reaction to those types of people, I have plenty of videos on that from the past of me making fun of white supremacists, white nationalists, neo-Nazis, etc., etc. Support the idea of choices, not one's ability to impose one's will. With that,